This COP has been pretty exciting, and there's lots of talk about ambition. I mean, how real is this ambition, and what does it actually look like?
Well, you're right that it's been really exciting. So in the first week at this COP, we had a flurry of announcements and pledges. You know, the methane pledge, the forests declaration, lots of announcements of money, all of these things. And I think the question that some people, especially observers, are asking is, you know, how can we make these credible? How can we make sure that these are implemented? I was in a stock taking yesterday, and I think it was the LDCs who asked, you know, how do we make sure all of this actually happens? You know, it sounds really good on paper, and it sounds like we've increased ambition. You might have heard the IEA, the International Energy Agency, come out with this new number of, well, because we're now heading for 1.8 rather than where we were before, 2.7 degrees warming, which sounds really good, doesn't it? It sounds really good, and I hope we can get there. Personally, I hope we can get there. But that's on the one side. But then on the other side, what we have, apart from all these commitments and pledges, what is happening is a lot of really technical negotiations behind the scenes on issues like carbon markets, like transparency and reporting, loss and damage, adaptation, and finance. And what we've been hearing from a lot of the negotiators, particularly those from the developing countries, is that, you know, like if you want ambition, you really need the finance for that. And we're also hearing from countries like the EU, from like Switzerland and New Zealand and the States, that we need, you know, high quality rules to kind of make the markets work that would enable this ambition. So it's about how do you enable the ambition with the right tools to get there.
So there's lots of scientists and civil society groups that are talking about this ambition, but are talking about the gap. Now, you know, is the gap something that we can get over? Are we going to bridge this gap?
Well, I think we can talk about this gap in a few different ways, right, Hugh? So we have the UNEP emissions gap report that comes out every year, which I'm sure you know about, which says all of the pledges and NDCs and these kinds of things are kind of leading us on a track that's going up like this, whereas if we were going to limit our warming to 1.5, we would be going down like that. And so I think next year it'll be interesting to see what the next iteration of that gap looks like. Maybe we've closed it a bit with these pledges, but then it's still about the implementation gap, which is still missing. Even the countries who I think have the most ambitious pledges, for instance in the UK, you see how the Committee on Climate Change have been saying, well, the UK has this great number of 68% by 2030, but actually the committee, who are the independent body, are saying, well, where are the policies and plans to meet that? So that's on the one hand. And then on the other, just a couple of weeks ago released as well, the production gap report, which is the other side of this. And, you know, I'm slightly biased because I was a co-author on that report, but basically you also have countries which have very ambitious, you know, net zero, all these kinds of things, but at the same time they are actually, all of their plans and policies would be increasing the amount of coal, oil and gas which they're extracting out of the ground. And those things are fundamentally incompatible.
Outside the COP, there's lots of cynicism and anger. Inside the COP, what's the mood? I mean, is it kind of likewise? There are people thinking this isn't quite working?
Well, inside the COP, you also have some of the same kinds of people who are outside the COP and who say, you know, this is just screwed up, quite frankly. And they are doing all kinds of actions to, you know, spotlight this and calling out the big polluters and all these kinds of things.
Is that happening?
In the rooms, I will say I spend most of my time in these smaller rooms in very technical negotiations. And what a lot of delegates are telling me is that there is, you know, really constructive work happening, that there's enthusiasm to conclude these items like Article 6 on markets that have been a sticking point previously. What we're hearing is that there is a real sort of a constructivity about that, which seems to many to be quite promising.
Do you think COP26 will be declared a success?
There will always be those who will declare COP26 a failure, and there will always be those who will declare it a success. I think there are actors with very vested interests in doing both. And so I think the task when we read sort of these headlines in, a few days' time is to think, now who wants which message to be heard and by who?
So, do you think that there's going to be a disparity between the voices outside and the voices inside as to whether this was a success? Is that going to be a long-lasting sort of remnant of this COP, or do you think the voices will get together and try and make everything work?
What you have here is different actors with really different backgrounds and incentives and everything. And the UNFCCC is a long-standing process that has accreted so many rules and decisions and treaties and everything over time, and it's got a particular way of doing things, and like all the negotiators who I speak to in those rooms have a particular task, and there is a gap. I think I can say this: there is a gap between that whole thing and expectations and perceptions, which think the COP is doing something entirely different from what it is tasked and mandated and set up to do. So there is a wide expectation gap, which has existed for a long time, but is, I think, only getting wider, and probably quite rightly with the sort of public perceptions of how the climate crisis is going, quite frankly. So I think it's going to be a difficult one to bridge.
Very good. So, in a word, optimistic?
Yeah, why not? We'll go with that.
Very good. Thanks very much, Natalie.
Thanks, you.